Yeah, so I guess I'll start off with what's your name and then what do you do for a living, or I guess what type of field you're in.
Yeah. So first name is Byron, last name is Rock. I do I do land. I have a company I've had for 20 years.
Hmm.
So we do landscape design and build construction from the city. It's called B Rock Landscaping, and then there's a small studio that we have downtown, which is like the design team who does primarily designing and project management. I'm the main designer,
Oh, okay.
so I do a lot of design work where I can apply like I guess C2C principles or biomimicry, um, the thought of it like into my designs.
Hmm.
And then I also have a development company where we build industrial buildings. That's just we have a few different projects with that, but
Is that
I
like the
tried.
larger scales type of stuff? Like,
Yeah, you're like construction of like landscapes are anywhere from thirty to $100,000 projects, right? It's
uh
primarily residential. You can get some big commercial ones that get into the millions, like 1 or 2 million
hmm.
and higher. But in commercial real estate, it's primarily like $1 million plus. So like the
Oh,
largest project I've done is 30. I'm working on right now is 30 million,
oh, geez.
um, and it's developing almost 100,000 square feet of industrial warehouse space on the West Perimeter Highway.
Oh, okay.
So so in that project, if as an example, like I have a retention pond that we've acquired along with the property,
Hmm.
and what I've done there is I planted over 100 trees along the one side of the lake, um, and there's also like a native prairie that's been put down.
Hmm.
And the idea with that is like I've consulted with um, marine biologists who've come out and they've given me their professional opinion on how to build the lake up so it's not like just it doesn't just turn into like a swamp of like algae.
Oh, yeah.
And so the idea there with I guess cradle to cradle, I don't know if that would be the right term, but more biomimicry is mimicking the natural systems that would go into a natural prairie pond. Like
Oh, yeah.
you'd have like bulrush, you'd have minnows to start the base of the food chain, and then you'd have like I believe they wanted white sucker, it's called, and then um, not carp, but there's another carp is invasive, but there's another one that's native to the local ecosystem in the lakes up in Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg.
Hmm.
So they give me the list of fish, and I'm trying to build the ecosystem with minnows first, and then I'll build it up so that it's self-sustaining. And the idea is that like all the runoff from the development goes into there. The bulrushes can help filter out all the stuff, and then the fish will balance out, like not let algae bloom
Hmm.
and not become just a dead pond, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
all of that is kind of mimicking nature, and that's one of the larger scale projects I've done. And then there's other things in the landscape side where like whenever I design a develop like we do commercial too, but if I design like somebody's property, for example, like they're gonna say, oh, I want low maintenance, and we will design in like all the native prairie plants
Hmm.
that would go around the property that like if there's a drought and they decide they don't want an irrigation system, well, these plants will still be there
Hmm.
if they neglect the landscape. So you're using what wants to grow in the native environment
Yeah.
in those designs, and yeah, and then just picking the right plants to put into those specific areas. Like if you have a drainage canal,
Hmm.
you're going to put in things like willows because willows like that kind of environment. If you're planting on a hill or planting on a river, like on a hill, you're going to put something that can tolerate full
That
of sun
type of.
exposure but no water.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Um, okay, and then I guess I'll go into my cradle to cradle questions here. So most of them are pretty broad. And then the first one has a couple side sections to it, but first one
Okay.
pretty basic. Have you ever created a cradle to cradle, I guess in your case, landscape architectural piece?
Um, Not specifically, but I could tell you about uh, some of my development projects, like the one I'm working on there.
Hmm.
I don't know how cradle to cradle would be, but we had made an agreement with like a road construction company
Hmm.
to bring us all the recycled material from road constructions around Winnipeg. So they bring us first. They actually brought us like the old sand bed that was underneath roads.
Mm.
And that was great because it's basically taking material that was like being used somewhere else, and I
Yeah.
reused it under our parking lots.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a sense, that is like zero waste.
Yeah. No,
Um,
consider
and
that.
then on top of that, we made a deal with them to bring in a crusher and take the concrete. So we piled up all the concrete, and I think I got to check how many tons it was, but it's a lot of tons. Like, it's a big mountain of concrete there, and they
Mm.
crushed it all summer for us. And we're taking that and recycling that into the base of the parking lots as well. So, because there was not enough sand underneath those roads, but there is definitely a lot of concrete that would normally be trucked to the landfill. So instead of paying the trucking costs for all that to go to the landfill, we're recycling it as a base under our parking lots.
Yeah.
And cradle to cradle, I guess it would. I would assume that like it's there long enough that it maybe break down even more, and then it could just be recycled again. Like this,
Yeah.
there's no reason for it to not to be.
Yeah.
There's also when we're trying to do the calculations on it, but like there's also the fact that you don't have to mine new material. Like when you build any kind of parking lots or anything like a foundation for a building, you need to actually mine crushed limestone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the green initiative that we did there. Is like we took that out of the equation. We don't have to actually get the supplier for the limestone to go and mine more limestone.
Oh yeah.
And truck it to the site. So there's a win on both sides, like for the disposal of the concrete being trucked farther down to the landfill, and then also bringing and mining heavy intensive like limestone mining out of the pits. So that I guess you could sort of say it's critical. Like critical to me like means more like manufacturing, and I'm a developer and a landscape contractor, so I would say on the landscape side, if I was to develop a landscape that was cradle to cradle, it would be almost like taking a piece of property, like I have a piece of property next door and I leave it like completely natural. That's cradle to cradle. It's going to be the same whatever I use it for. And I built an ice rink on it, let's say.
Oh yeah.
And I'm using I used hay bales instead of like boards.
Yeah, and lumber
So,
and whatnot.
Yeah, and in that sense, you could just take those hay bales and repurpose them after, or I could just like take them apart and let them like dissolve into the landscape.
Yeah, biodegradable.
So that's an example you could use, I guess, if you want to say like constructing something out of something that's organic as much as possible.
Okay, well that pretty much answered all of the side questions I even had for it too. But that's perfect. And then, okay, my second question, I guess in your case it was how does cradle to cradle design compare to other like biocentric designs? But for your case, how would cradle to cradle compare to like biomimicry? Like, which do you think would be more beneficial in a sense? Because I know cradle or biomimicry sort of does the same thing in a sense. Like it's not.
Yeah, it's definitely related, and I researched a bit of biomimicry, and that's what I liked. What I liked about it is it seemed more like a base for cradle to cradle. Like it seemed more like fundamental because you're doing the same thing with cradle to cradle. You're trying to create a system that just everything is recycled to zero waste, where nature does that all day long.
Yeah.
Right. So in that link to that book I sent you, the Shark's Paintbrush, there's a few other books on the topic, but like biomimicry, like says like nature, one of the things I remember from it is like nature only has like one way to grow. So like it can't go and pick up tools and like change things. It really can just grow in one direction. So like Fibonacci's ratio is that spiral. Yeah. Like seashells grow in one direction, right? It's the most efficient way to do something. And like, people have taken like that example and like applied it to like the Dyson vacuum or like
they build like staircases out of that too, right? Like spiral staircases. Like in
exactly.
sequence.
Exactly. Very efficient. Yeah, very efficient designs. And I used that specifically on a daycare project once where like there was a very small space these kids had to play in, and they wanted to maximize the space. So what I did is I designed a whole area to be planted with native prairie grasses, and then I carved out a spiral within that path that leads up a hill to a teepee. I can send you the video if you want to use it. And it just was a very inefficient way using biomimicry to like have these kids have this experience of like walking through this spiral path instead of like them just playing in an open field that doesn't feel very intimate,
straightforward sort of thing.
Yeah, and then the other aspect to that project was some of the kids had autism, so they wanted them to have a sensory path So along the path, there was like different things for them to like interact with
hmm
as they get to the top peak of the hill, which had like a teepee on it.
hmm
So that's a really like biomimicry inspired design, I would say.
Okay, yeah. Um, that's another question I have here. So, with a predicted 300% rise in energy and materials over the next 50 years, do you think forms of design such as cradle to cradle will start to become more popular as like pollution starts to rise, greenhouse gases are going up, global warming, and all those sorts of things? Or do you think it'll still just be the same sorts of building forms, or more so to biomimicry even?
I no, I think like we're gonna have to change. Like I mean, it's either we change or we get forced to change.
hmm
So like it's not really like you have like there's an option, right? You
Yeah,
can't keep it in the same way. So at the fundamental level, like the environmental climate change problem is really just a physics problem of like too much heat.
hmm
So we have to turn down the heat, and it's not going to happen unless we change the way we're doing things.
yeah,
So there's lots of examples of uh, innovations that could come on board, but the economics of it have to make sense because it doesn't like the people are driven by like greed in the
yeah,
economy
yeah.
generally. It's hard to like make them change unless there's an economic incentive. So either we're controlling them more with government stimulation, or it just becomes more costly to do business a certain way, and then it forces people to change.
hmm
Yeah, because like
Uh,
there's better ways to build buildings. Like you could take, for example, rammed earth. I don't know if you've heard of rammed earth construction, but
I
I
think so.
looked into that.
Uh-huh.
Rammed earth is like you take mud and you use way less concrete, but you use a tool that like rams earth together with concrete, and they've
hmm
built houses like that out in BC.
Yeah,
But right now it's very costly to do it.
yeah.
Or sorry, not it's not. It's just I don't know if it's more costly or if it's just time consuming. But you could definitely make that scale it up and make it economical. And I know some people in your dad's business group like Tracy Dick. She built her house out of hay bales for foundation.
Oh, okay.
Um, there's different ways to use less concrete because Portland cement is one of the big factors for climate change.
Yeah, isn't it one of
So
the number one like pollutants from like building homes and things like that? Like
yeah,
concrete
it's very
waste
energy and
afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah.
So solving that problem is huge. Like that's why we chose to recycle the concrete, and
hmm
there's definitely room for improvement,
hmm
but the economics have to follow somehow. Like they have to be incentivized.
Um, okay, and then kind of a lead-on question to that one. Do you think that cradle to cradle design with like how much, or not even energy, I guess it would be more energy, but cost too, would be able to keep up with the ever-growing population as well and the need for change? Because isn't it Winnipeg has like a bunch of crumbling bridges and things like that? Do you think it's more efficient to do that now, or do you think it's just going to be something that's eventually forced?
Sorry, the question is,
Just do you think
uh,
that cradle to cradle will keep up, sort of thing? Like, will it, or do you think it's too late now?
no, I think people are trying. Like, I mean, everybody like my generation and older,
hmm
even though it doesn't seem like it, they people do want to do what's good for the future. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so I can't see. I don't know how. Like, I'm only built for myself. I'm not like building for other people usually. So I don't know what. Um, I don't know what the industry like the PCLs or the big companies that build for other people are doing.
hmm
Um, so it's hard for me to know if they're actually doing more green initiatives. But from what I've seen, like there are products coming online, like in landscaping, like one of the big manufacturers, Barkman Concrete, was pushing for a long time permeable pavers,
hmm
which like helps capture water runoff and stuff like that for heavy storms. I mean that, yeah, that in that regard, I guess is an initiative. Like, and then you can recycle those pavers into a base. So yeah, it's hard to say. That's a hard question. I'm not sure like what the future holds.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's like
yeah,
asking me
yeah,
what if I know if I have an 8 ball, I can tell you what the future's like.
yeah, yeah. No, it's pretty broad like that. Okay, and then another one I had was, do you think that cradle to cradle design and like cradle to cradle materials being like biodegradable and just being
Sorry about
biodegradable?
that.
No, no worries. Do you think that they'll help benefit build like the traditional home compared to using like moist trapping materials? Or do you think it'll affect their timelines and all the builds will just be taking 10 times just as long?
Um, like the like if I was to put on like my economics hat, like the market is kind of like there's high end builders and then there's low end builders.
Okay, yeah.
So if we can raise the I think if we were to raise like the standards, we
Mhm.
would eliminate all those guys that are just coming in and like building things as cheap as possible, and they're generally not trying to do builds that that aren't, they don't even think about like what's economical or
Mhm.
sorry what's green, right? Whereas I know a few builders that like one guy just specializes in insulation and conserving energy in the home, and he's a little bit more expensive, but like not much. But
Mhm.
because of what he's doing, it's actually a green thing, right? Like he's conserving, he's making his houses so efficient that it's great for efficiency. And he went from spray foam, I think at one point, which I don't know how biodegradable spray foam is, to blow-in insulation, which
Okay.
is like the that material that can biodegrade.
Oh, okay. I have not
Yeah,
heard about that, but
yeah. So I can look up his name if you wanted to talk to him if you had time still. But like his homes are pretty efficient, and he uses that. Like I would say, all the materials in his home is like stuff that can just go be.
it's just
If it
kind of
was to
crumble
throw
down.
it out on the street, it wouldn't like be waste, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, that kind of leads into my next question as well. Since Cradle to Cradle is a lot about like waste reduction and just a full cycle until to nothing, do you think that waste reduction is like the bare minimum for environmental stability? Or do you think it's just a good first stepping stone?
Waste reduction, yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's there's nothing wrong with the idea. Like if you can
Yeah,
recycle everything,
yeah.
yeah, it's hard to get 100% efficiency though. But like, say like use natural materials like limestone for your cladding. I mean, that's perfectly reusable or just crushed to back into a base for your. So the less, I think the real thing is like if you cut through it all, like anything that's processed and manufactured with oil, it takes over 100 years to like biodegrade. Is not.
Mm,
You should try to like go through supply chain and pick out the things that are like you can get rid of that. You know
yeah.
what's a substitute for that?
Like what's the stuff that's never gonna biodegrade or still be around by the time you're gone anyway, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, like anything that's manufactured with some sort of oil in it that like it's because I mean if you think about it, oil has been like made over millions of years. Of course, it's not going to biodegrade as quick as something that like well, I shouldn't say that, but like Tyndallstone is like an example. Like it's made millions of years ago, but you can crush it up and it's safe for us to like put it back into the environment in any form.
Mm,
Whereas a plastic, I don't know how you'd yeah, you could just keep recycling, but I don't know how you'd break it down.
yeah, into anything else or other than plastic.
Yeah,
Um, so I had some other questions, but they're more like about the like biological materials that they built. Um,
right.
I don't know if you know too much about those. I can go over those as well because I had some about just passive energy systems, especially for Winnipeg since our climate is varying a ton. And that's like another part of Cradle to Cradle, just trying to use passive energy sources. Um, so what do you think that the most viable one for Winnipeg would be?
Oh, like passive energy source, like for powering buildings, you mean? Or
Yeah, powering buildings or like using glazed sunlights for heat or like high thermal mass materials, things like that.
well, on the energy front for like buildings, I don't think it's we're pretty green. I would suspect like with the hydropower we have, like
Oh,
so
okay,
like
yeah, yeah,
for Manitoba, like we're pretty good in that regard. Like our electricity, you don't have to feel bad when you turn in the lights here because you're just getting power from like things that are naturally flowing anyways.
hmm
Natural gas is not the ideal thing, but it's like better than any of the alternatives for the heat.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know the calculation of like how that contributes to climate change compared to like, but I think it's the worst of it's in one of the it's the lesser of the all the evils on the fossil fuel side.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I mean, I've looked at solar panel costs and stuff like that too for like some of our buildings, but the incentives aren't there. Like there used to be a program with Hydro to like invest in that, and I
Oh
was
yeah.
going to try to take advantage of that,
Yeah.
but never came on board. Otherwise, I would have definitely
Oh.
been looking at that. But I know it makes sense in like Southern California and places like that, and
Hmm.
Hawaii. I see like lots of stuff like that going up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that basically finishes off all my questions I have here. I can stop my